Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And second of all, it's always a challenge to be the after-lunch speaker. So we'll try to keep this as lively as possible, just to kind of keep everybody awake and everybody with me. I think it's extremely exciting that we have a sold-out security fair this year. It's always a challenge, I think, and really have the number of state employees we have, and having the opportunity to have some of our partners with us is really absolutely terrific. And one of the things that is a consistent and important theme for me is the work that all of you do and your interest in security, because that is one of my main priorities. And we'll talk a little bit today about how security is a driver for many of the activities that you see going on in the state as it relates to technology. And that's really what I want to do today, is to really put in perspective several of the things that are happening from a technology perspective, but to link those to why we're doing them. And in many, many cases, the reason that we're doing them is really to improve our ability to protect our networks and to protect the citizen data that we're responsible for. And that doesn't always get the kind of press that we would like for it to get. We talk a lot about cost savings, we talk a lot about efficiencies, but when we're really talking about efficiencies and reliability, what's even more important is the aspect of security. And that's really what I want to get across today, is how these things are linked and the fact that they're really not separate, they're really a part of everything that we do. So what I thought I'd do is to start out actually just kind of backtracking a little bit to tell you kind of what are the 4 things that drive me as I look at how I see information technology in California. And when I look at information technology in California, I don't just look at the Office of the Chief Information Officer. I look at what the entire state is doing from the standpoint of technology. So we have over 10,000 state employees that are working in technology on an ongoing basis. And so my role is to worry about what all of those folks are doing and how we can make sure that we're doing them in a consistent way, we're doing them in an enterprise way, and we're doing them in a secure way. So the first priority for me is making sure we're delivering successful IT projects. Because infrastructure in and of itself isn't really what you care about. It isn't what your neighbors care about. It isn't necessarily, it's a part of running the railroad. So the thing we want to make sure is that we're delivering successful IT projects. And one of the challenges in terms of delivering successful IT projects more and more is making sure that we have security embedded in those projects. It's not an afterthought, but it's a part of the way that we deliver those projects. And we'll talk about one area, identity management, which is a really major part of the way we're going to be doing projects going forward, but it's also a major part of being able to protect our information and know who's getting into our networks. The second is a strong team and an organization. That's really all about you. It's not only about you and the work that you do, but it's about the work that you do to educate others in your organizations about the importance of security. Many of you who are in a Chief Information Security Officer role, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, half of the time your role is to try to get everybody else to recognize the importance of security. And that, we want to recognize how important that is. Thirdly, it is securing. It's the security of the personal information of Californians, whether that's our networks or whether that's actually protecting at the point of entry to the data. It's really all about making sure that everything that we do is secure. And lastly, it's really about then a technology platform that we can build on. Because if we don't have a strong and robust technology platform, we can't make sure that it's secured, we can't give all of you an opportunity to work in the environment, and we can't get those projects delivered that we want. So the 4 things really go together in terms of what we want to be from an IT organization standpoint. So one of the four agenda items that I think is the topic for today is really around securing that information. And it's really, in my mind, providing enterprise-wide leadership in information security, risk management, and the protection of critical infrastructure. And those are the things that I know each of you focuses on a daily basis. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go back and celebrate a little bit in terms of what's been accomplished, because we always think about what's left to do and what things that we have to do. And of course, in the security world, I'm not telling you anything new, that it's not only that it's never done, but the risks are actually increasing, not decreasing. So the need for us to stay vigilant, the need for us to look at different kinds of solutions are growing. They're not shrinking by any stretch. And we always have to be looking at what's the latest thing. But having said that, we've come a long way as an organization in really being able to address the security issues. We've established the agency Chief Information Security Officer working closely with the CIOs. Again, the idea there is to make sure that security is a priority for the CIOs and it's being built in up front. We've established a strategic plan for information security. We've collaborated with our partners on a federated identity trust domain and documenting a roadmap, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, this is a subset of all of the things that all of you have been working on. We've released our telework and our remote access security policy, which is a big challenge for all of us now. In this world of social networking, how do we make sure that people can use the kinds of tools that are being available, but do it in a secure way that doesn't jeopardize the information that we're the custodians of? We've implemented an information security officer training class, which has gone very well. Have some of you gone to that class? Anybody gone? I think, we had great attendance. It was really well received. We're going to continue to do that from an education standpoint. And we've secured funding to stand up an enterprise risk management project and establish a secure program infrastructure. And the way we've been able to do that is by having a statewide program, we can now apply for federal grant money as a state. And we've been able to work with the Department of Homeland Security to secure that grant money to be able to do the kinds of things that need to be done, but do it in the budget situation that we have today. So what are the things that we've got coming up? Well, we have to really implement our plan. We've got a plan, but what we really need to do is to make sure that that's implemented. A part of that is that internal to the Office of the State Chief Information Officer, we're now looking at projects when they come to us on FSRs from a security perspective, as well as a financial perspective, as well as from a project management perspective. So I have to get the different groups in the office to also work together from a security standpoint. We're developing and publishing privacy and data protection standards in line with our enterprise architecture, because again, it's very closely aligned with the way that we define the technology. We're about to release our identity and access management policy and standards. We want the state to have a consistent, uniform way of doing identity management. We have a number of very large projects coming up. DMV has just started a part of this identity management process. EDD is going to be a part of it, and the new Fiscal project is going to be a part of it. So we got to catch the new projects as they're coming in, because we weren't going to be able to go back and retrofit what we have, but we've got plenty of new projects coming on where we'll really be able to identify where we need to have the identity management and do it in a uniform way. We're going to implement our secure DNS infrastructure project. That's something that's been out there on the books for some time. And develop a smartphone security policy and standards, because one of the things that's happening now is with the advent of all of the different wireless devices, we can't be in a situation where we're saying to people, no, you can't use them. We have to be in a situation where we say, here's how you use them, but use them in a secure way, because the devices are only going to grow in use. They're not going to go away, and we have to be prepared for the advent of the iPhones, of the iPads, and figure out how to embrace that technology, but again, thinking about it from a security perspective and making sure that we're protected. I'll give you an example of that. I speak very often. Rebecca Jacoby is the Chief Information Officer for Cisco. And of course, they have at their fingertips technical resources, and they for a long time went through the agony of, were they going to allow iPhones and iPads for their employees and let them attach to the network? And so I've sort of followed Rebecca, because I figured that once she got to the point where she was comfortable with doing it, that we would be able to follow in her lead. And I've talked with her, and she's done a lot of restructuring. It isn't just a question of connection, but it's also a way of how services are actually delivered, so that then we can take advantage of these other devices. So these are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking of, because again, this is the future. This is effectively where our employees are going to continue to want to go as they're delivering services either in healthcare, in public safety, and we've got to figure out how to make that work. And then finally, we're doing security reporting scorecards so that we can make sure that all the departments are all at the same level of meeting the standards that we see as so important from a security perspective. But that's just a start. While we're continuing to improve on technology, we have to improve on security, because again, that challenge never stops. Now, what I'd like to do now is to shift gears a little bit, because I know many of you have heard about the bill that was just passed, the legislation that was just passed. It's called AB 2408. And I want to just give you a few minutes about what it is, and then also try to tie it to what's going to be happening from a security perspective going forward. What we did with AB 2408 was to take the efforts that the governor has pushed through and turn them into legislation. So for instance, we had the governor's reorganization plan that brought together the Office of the State Chief Information Officer along with OTEC, brought in the Office of Information Security and our public safety organization. That reorganization plan had to then be put into statute to make sure that it would carry on, particularly through the transition that we're going to be experiencing in the next few months with the new governor and the new administration coming in. We've also had executive orders. So we had a set of executive orders that talked about the relationships between the State Chief Information Officer, the agency information officers, the CIOs, talked about procurement changes that we want to make. And most recently, there was an executive order that talked about our consolidation targets and what the state wants to do from a consolidation perspective. We took all of those things and put it into legislation, again, so that we could be sure that we continued. Now, another part of what we did was we actually changed the name of the Office of the State Chief Information Officer to the California Technology Agency. Now, there were a couple of reasons for that. One is that at an agency status and at an agency level, it's much easier for the legislature to understand what we do. I had my legislative guy, John Dickinson's here over in the corner there, and as he likes to say, when he goes and talks to legislators, they really don't know what a CIO is or does. So they kind of just say that technology person that the governor hired. And what we want to make sure is that the legislature understands what we do, because in the end, we get our money from the legislature. So it's very important that they can relate to the kinds of things that we're focused on, the kinds of things that we're doing. The second reason that we did it is when a new administration's coming in, when all the other members of the governor's cabinet are agency secretaries, it's hard for a new administration to kind of figure out, well, where does this other person fit? So it's very much around continuity. But the other piece of it is we're getting asked to participate in many different technology areas, even beyond running our projects, running our networks, and running our infrastructure. We're being asked to be advisors on how technology can be used in healthcare. We're being asked to advise in how technology can impact economic development. John Dickinson was responsible for getting the most money that any state got for bringing in monies to build out the state's broadband. the federal stimulus dollars that came in. And we're very proud of the fact that out of all of the states, California got the most money to help build out that infrastructure. So we're more than a chief information officer in an organization. We're being asked to do a lot of those other things, and we want to do a lot of those other things because technology permeates everything that's happening in the state, and it's important that we have a role in that and that all of you are a part of that so that your importance to the state continues to be emphasized on an ongoing basis. The other things that we've done, as I said, is that we've codified the governor's reorganization plan. We've required that each state agency have a chief information officer, and we've actually incorporated the consolidation directives. Now, some of the other things that were included in here is a much more active role in IT procurement, because much of what we buy today from a hardware and software standpoint, we want to be able to do it in a much more uniform way and make sure that security is embedded in all of the things that we buy. So we want to take a much more active role from a procurement perspective. That was another thing that was in here. Another area is that we want all of the IT personnel to report into a chief information officer so that the chief information officers in the various departments and agencies have control over how technology dollars are being spent. Because what we find is that if technology is purchased by a program area, they may not necessarily conform to our enterprise architecture, and they may not necessarily take into consideration things like security, things like the ability to run the system after you get it, after you buy it. As I think many of you in your program areas know that someone in your areas, then the business side will go to a conference. They'll get a great sales pitch about a piece of software, and they'll say, well, gee, I want to buy that because that's going to solve all my problems. But they're not really thinking about all the technical ramifications of actually bringing that software in. So having all of you have the ability to have control over the technology that comes in is what we're very, very focused on. So with that, I thought it was important to walk through what are the consolidation objectives. So in other words, what are we asking the departments and agencies to do over the course of the time between now and June 2013? Well, first we're asking that all mission critical and public-facing applications and server refreshes be in a Tier 3 data center. Now, what's our reason for that? Well, we want them all to be in a facility that has backup power. We want them to be in a facility that is going to be protected from natural disaster. And we want to be able to work more on our disaster recovery processes. So, for instance, one of the things that we've done, finally, is to be able to move out of Cannery. Because Cannery, as you all know, was sitting on two major cross streets with a railroad track behind it. It was not a secure facility. And we've been able to, by actually cleaning up at what we had in the data center at Gold Camp, we were able to take out all of the equipment from the Cannery, relocate it to Gold Camp, not needing to have any additional facilities, and we were able to get our backup facility in Vacaville at another state facility, not needing to go outside to spend any more money. And now we have a very robust disaster recovery site. We're working very hard on many aspects of OTEC. And so the idea is to get out of, in many cases, what we're running in, which aren't even some cases computer rooms, they're more computer closets, and be able to get into facilities that we can protect. And we have several facilities. FTB, I was over there yesterday. They have a Tier 3 facility. The Water Resources Board has a facility that we're moving up to Tier 3, and we're going to use that for resources. So it isn't a single facility, but it's the facilities that we believe are robust enough to run all of the applications that we have. Secondly is to move to a shared state email system. And I think many of you may have seen there's going to be two choices for that. You can either go to OTEC and use CA mail, or else there will be another purchase solution that some departments may want to use. But the important piece of this from a security perspective is not only do we not want to run on 100 email systems, which just makes us vulnerable because email is our most critical application, but one of the important things is it gets us all on a single directory. Once we're on a single directory, we can link that single directory to identity management and then be able to ensure that for all of our employees that are actually utilizing our systems or on our infrastructure, we're identifying them, we know where they are, we can keep control of them in a uniform way again, instead of having to do it over and over and over again. Next thing we're asking that we're in migration to the California Government Enterprise Network. Now, this is not only a cost-saving measure, although we've been able to do a great job by bringing the usage together to actually lower our rates, but this is one of the biggest security initiatives, because to secure our applications and our information, we have to be able to secure the perimeter. We have to be able to secure the network. And to do that, we want to do it again in a much more uniform way, rather than having separate networks for each organization and linking them together. That gives us way too many points of failure, way too many opportunities for us being vulnerable to having a breach. So the network piece is something that's been a concern to me from the very beginning. We're starting to get to move toward the new network configuration. Department of Motor Vehicles was one of our first pilots. They're nearly complete with their migration. They've done a fabulous job of really moving this forward. We've got server room facilities, again, that we want to move into our data centers. We've got our data center square footage reduction. We've already met a data center square footage reduction of 25% by moving out of the cannery facility and the facility that was behind it into facilities that we already had. And then we're focused on energy consumption. We want to drive energy consumption down, again, through our data center consolidation, but also through the server virtualization efforts that all of your organizations are working on today. It's interesting that one of the reasons that we were able to get space at Vacaville was because Skiff had actually built a very large computer room or computer facilities there, but once they started to get into virtualization, they found that they weren't going to need all of that square footage, and therefore were able to lease some of that to us to really look at disaster recovery. So we think we're going to see a continual shrinking footprint, actually, in terms of square footage, as we move to a more virtualized environment. The other thing is, as we move to a virtualized environment and a standardized environment, we're going to have an infrastructure that's going to allow the application developers to come onto our infrastructure much more easily. It isn't going to have to be created every single time we have a new application. So our desire, again, is to make sure that we have an infrastructure that allows us to be responsive to what the application needs are and to be able to do it in a secure way. So what does this mean? Well, we've had some significant successes from a security perspective in the consolidation work that's been done already. The first one I know that all of you participated in is eHub. We are pretty much completed with eHub. Caltrans is going to be coming on. We have 2 or 3 departments coming on, and we're seeing the kinds of numbers that we would expect in terms of what we're catching, through that, and our ability to continue to protect. The percentage of email that we're actually catching, at that point, I think the figures, I didn't put them up here because they're all familiar to you, but it's staggering the amount that we're actually blocking out, and even with that, the amount of spam, et cetera, that still gets through. The second is our secure internet gateway, our security policies, the disaster recovery preparedness, and again, professional development for the security personnel. And these are things that by doing them as an enterprise, by doing them as a complete IT organization, rather than doing them in the individual departments, gives us a much greater opportunity to leverage, to be able to do it at a reduced cost, but more importantly, when we're doing it in fewer different ways, use, we have much greater opportunity to be able to ensure that we're secure. But having said that, again, we've got plenty left to do. Our ability to come together really gives us the chance to now drive forward on the next set of things that needs to be done as an organization. Clearly, we have the next phase of eHub that still needs to be worked on. We're just at the beginning of looking at our secure internet gateway. And again, from a standpoint of secure DNS, we're still at the baby step stage. We're just getting started defining the issue. And that was one where we had hoped to be farther along at this point, but just didn't get there. We had a number of other things, and I know all of you know the priority issues, but we're still very focused on that. We think that's a very important part of what we need to do from a security perspective. The next one is particularly important, and that is around a very robust risk management program. And that's everything from a more uniform way of assessing our disaster recovery needs, trying to understand whether we're going to need additional facilities to be able to put and make sure that we are insourcing some of the disaster recovery we're doing today. We're doing it in a much more uniform way. It also means that we need to be thinking very carefully as we're developing systems around the risk management piece of that, and we're building in the disaster recovery aspects up front. We need to be looking at how we're protecting our data, because we've got two things going on. We're starting to expose our data through our websites, but while we're doing that, we have to make sure that it is protected. So we've got kind of two demands going on around transparency, and yet there's the need to protect the information. So I think one of the major things that I'm going to be focused on is really looking at that whole question of risk management. What are all the implications of it, and how do we make sure that we're doing it in the most robust way? So what is the role that all of you play, and what are the things that are important as you're looking at consolidation coming in, but looking at it more from a security perspective, and what are the kinds of things that you need to be looking out for? Well, first of all, I think it starts with, at least I know many of you are aware of what was in 2408, but it really starts with an overall awareness of what it is we're trying to do, what are the objectives, and then thinking through how does that impact what you deliver to your organizations on a daily basis. So what are the things that are part of your responsibilities? And then it's really to get involved in work groups and begin to learn more. One of the things that we have is we have 7 different work groups around consolidation. One of those work groups is specifically focused on security. And so what we're going to be doing is we've got over 200 volunteers today across our 7 work groups. We're going to want to come out and ask some of you to participate in the work group around security. Because again, all of you have different needs, all of you have different experiences, and we need to pull together your knowledge to determine what's the right direction for the state. How do we want to move a consolidated security program together? And what does this all mean? I mean, what does this mean to all of you as security professionals? Well, first of all, we believe that it really gives us a way of providing better training, and it gives us an opportunity to provide better career growth. We're not going to be looking at every technology that's out there, but try to focus on fewer technologies, give you an opportunity as you're looking at moving from organization to organization, that you'll have skill sets that'll be readily transferable to other organizations and other opportunities that you might find. It ensures that IT is critical. One of the things that's always a challenge is everyone's concerned as we expand the use of technology, what is that going to mean in terms of protecting my information? So again, the role that you play is really pivotal to the credibility of your IT organizations in total. Because again, if we can't keep our system secure, that's when we end up on the front page of the Sacramento Bee, and that's when a citizen says, gee, I don't want to file my income taxes online because I don't know if that information is going to be protected. In the healthcare arena, one of the biggest obstacles right now to information sharing around electronic medical records, for instance, is a fear on the part of individuals that if they provide that information in an electronic form, that they'll lose control over it and they won't be able to designate who gets it and who doesn't get it. So again, security keeps coming up as being the major factor in so many of these technology initiatives. And then finally, we want to continue to push technology into government. We think there's many areas where if we applied technology, we could make government better. So it's not just a question of thinking about how do we satisfy how many servers that we need, what we need to do with our network, but how do we actually build applications so that, again, government can run better, so that caseworkers in the field can better get to the individuals that they serve and make sure that those information are available to get them into the programs that they need, as an example. So again, my main message here is to try to convince you how important you all are to everything that's happening from a technology perspective. It really is essential that you're vigilant. It's really essential that you're a part of everything that happens, not just from a security perspective, but embedding that security in everything we do from a technology drive going forward. Secondly, to try to give you a perspective that consolidation, in many ways, as I say, while it's about cost savings, the actual secret is that it's more about making sure that we're secure, because when we're secure, then we'll be able to do more, and the cost savings will come from that. And lastly, to continue to look at those kinds of applications. And it's really all about all of you. These things happen because of your focus, because of your dedication, because of the things that you know that you need to do on an ongoing basis. And that's why these security forums are so terrific. It gives us an opportunity for all of you to get together. It gives us an opportunity to bring in the external speakers, to get different perspectives on security, because one of the things that I want to make sure is that security is not an afterthought, but rather that security is up front in our thinking for all of the technology things that we do. So again, thank you for all of your efforts. Thank you for everything that you do on a daily basis to make sure that the citizen information is protected. So what I'd like to do, okay, thank you. Thanks. So where's Keith? Do I have time to take some questions? Oh, I have a half an hour for questions. All right. Well, I didn't bore you, at least with an hour's worth of talking. So I think that the question piece is actually the most interesting piece. So questions? Yes.
My name is Ravi. I work for the OSI. My question is, probably it's related. Of course, it is related to the security, but in general, what is the state's direction on SOA architecture as well as the cloud computing?
Okay.
I know that cloud computing hasn't started really well with the state, maybe due to security
Sure.
concerns, but what's the strategy?
Sure. The question is, what's the state's view, or what are our views on SOA, and what are our views on cloud computing? So let's start with SOA. Some of you may have heard that I'm not a great fan of those three letters. It's not that I have a problem with a service-oriented architecture. It's that for many of you, you may have heard that the vendors were out there for a long time selling SOA. That was one of my favorite all-time things. And it was going to do everything, right? It was going to solve all the problems of the world. And interestingly enough, it didn't solve all the problems of the world. So I think from the standpoint of service-oriented architecture, that is where we want to move. Particularly as we're looking at data protection, we're going to want to look at, for instance, more web services. We're going to want to look at more things, actually from a technology perspective, served up as a service. So I think that, SOA still plays a big part in what we're doing. One of the challenges around a service-oriented architecture was that initially it was billed as a way for us to create technology in one department and actually be able to reuse it. That's a lot tougher We don't have a good structure for being able to do that sharing. And I think that that's why I'm looking at certain areas of consolidation like identity management, because those are going to be some of the ways that we're going to get some of the benefits of SOA in our diverse, kind of organization. Let me move to cloud computing, because cloud computing actually, and the reason that the state has not gone heavily to cloud computing is a security issue. There's two pieces of cloud computing that I think are important. There's the concept of cloud computing, which is a uniform computing platform that the application people can use without standing it up. That piece is extremely important to the state going forward. It requires standards, it requires having a reliable infrastructure, and that concept is important whether you do it inside the state or whether you buy it. So one of the things that we're looking at is how can we stand it up inside the state where we can be assured of the security, where we can set the standards, and still be able to get the benefits of it, okay? The second piece is when would be the occasions that we would want to buy it? And one of the things we want to do is when we buy cloud services, we don't want each individual department to be buying them. Because right now, we don't believe that the market's mature enough in terms of once you're there, how do you get out? Once you're there, how do you control the access? Once you're there, how do you control the security? So we're looking right now at whether or not we do need to buy cloud services on the outside from a hosting perspective. Because right now, based on the demand that your organizations have told us, we don't. So we may need to look at it for disaster recovery. That's an area that we're looking at right now. So it isn't a question of is it a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. There's a lot of value to the concept of cloud computing, and then once you look at that value, you have to say, can I do it internally and serve it up in a secure way, or are there going to be occasions when I have to buy it? And when I buy it, security actually has to be one of the major factors and criteria around who do you buy it from and where do you buy. Okay? And that's actually one of the reasons why you haven't seen us sort of say, we're moving out of our data centers. Yes?
For security controls, has the state issued any or published any requirements?
In terms?
Minimum requirements for security controls?
You mean in terms of for the vendor community and things coming in?
Or what's required in the system, state system?
The question is around, have we published security controls? Keith, I've got to defer to you. I don't know the specifics of that.
It depends on the customer, the data classification of the system. So an example where I can say yes is where it's a federally funded system, we're driving the customer to recognize NIST 853, the federal controls for federally funded systems, PCI for credit card standards. I'm forgetting one off the top of my head. Well, HIPAA is we're not as mature in the HIPAA world, but we're getting there. We're hoping to actually drive towards NIST because then we'll be able to leverage that. But it's starting to do that across the state where it hasn't been done before. Also, maybe mention something about the RFP reviews going forward.
Yeah. Well, that's really part of the overall project review.
Yeah.
Again, in our overall project review, we're going to be looking for a lot more rigorous declaration of what's needed from a security standpoint, and that then we are going to be reviewing all of the technology RFPs going forward, so we're going to be imposing standards as it relates to that. The other thing that is included, by the way, in 2408 is that we are now going to have review of service-based contracts. So in other words, if any of your organizations are buying technology bundled with services, kind of in the way that the current Medicaid project was bundled with technology and services, we now will have review capability or a review responsibility for those services projects. So we're trying to corral it. It's not as tight as what we'd like it to be, but we continue to stay focused on it. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Not at all? Yes.
Regarding outsourcing and security IT, we know that they outsource a lot of the backbone stuff for the department through the agency. What do you see as the outsource potential for security?
I don't know how you outsource security. I mean, the control of security, well, first of all, the control of everything we do from a technology standpoint, whether we choose to use a vendor or not, has to be controlled by state employees. And we've been pretty adamant that one of the things we want is greater control, particularly of projects, by state employees, rather than having vendors watching vendors watching vendors watching vendors. Okay? So the architecture, the technical work that we do, all of the technical work around security has to be done by state employees. Now, in some cases, as in eHub, because we got a little working group together, we had the working group say, how do you want to provide that service? Do you want to provide that service internally? Do we have the capabilities to do it? Where would we stand it up? Or do we think that it's more effective for us to buy it on the outside? And that group came up with the conclusion that based on the services that are out there today, it made sense to buy it from the outside. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and it's going to be driven by what state employees believe is the right thing for the state, and then a decision on what's the right way to buy it, is the market mature enough, and then we would go through a standard procurement process. So it's not in the sense of sort of this wholesale outsourcing of a function concept. It's more around we decide what we want to do, and then we look at the marketplace and see whether that's a service that's best done by us or best done by somebody from the outside. Yes?
Yeah, my question is regarding a IT policy letter that came out earlier this year, and then it was kind of backed up as well with an executive order. It had to do with the reporting of the ISOs and the agency ISOs to the CIOs. And one of the pieces of those documents stated that your office would be providing some guidance and some documentation on the qualifications for
Right.
the information security officers at the agency level and at the department level. When do you anticipate that document being completed?
That document is pretty much completed, I thought, Keith. That was my, I gotta, and poor Keith just, Keith just hit the job. So you can blame it on Mark Weatherford if you want to,
There's a lot of good progress been made there, but is it ready to be published? No. And one point of clarification, the interpretation we have right now is that criteria is for the agency ISOs, not the department ISOs. But that said, that does not mean you shouldn't use it as an opportunity to leverage within your department, but that's not part
So
of
when do we think we're going to have it done?
Oh,
Because I think that's the question that's being asked.
I was trying to,
I know that, Keith. That's why I asked you the question.
I would say, I'm going to say within 3 months, within.
Okay. All right. Is that something that you need right away?
Well, I think a lot of us in state information security professions want to know, as our part of our professional development, what should we be gearing to?
Gotcha.
What should we be shooting for?
Gotcha.
And without having those
Yeah, fair enough.
expectations, it's very hard to gear your training with low dollars for training,
Sure.
especially in security. A lot of us are having to fund that out of our personal funds.
Yeah.
We have to decide, what's the best fit for
Okay.
our careers. To move
All right.
up and
Why don't you let us take that question away and get back to you with a good answer, okay? Because I think, I've kind of put Keith on the spot here. And clearly, if it's something that you need, and I understand your need, let us get back to you, and we'll put something out on the website, as it relates to when we'll be able to get it out. Okay? Great. Thanks. Yes?
I heard what you said about cloud computing, but on the other side, we, departments are planning to move forward with the 2408 and the consolidation effort into a tier 3 data center. Do you think there'll be any kind of a state policy for cloud computing to meet the need of consolidation over the next couple of years? Or are we going to be limited to either the 2 Tier 3 data centers that the state has?
Right now, we are going to publish we're working on a policy letter right now around cloud computing. And it's really more based around the decision process around when you look at cloud computing. The answer to your question is it depends on the demand. I'm not a great one for standing up capability that we don't have any demand for, because when we do that, we spend money that we don't need to be spending, quite frankly. So I think the answer to your question is more around if we see a demand from a departmental and agency standpoint, then we'll go out and look at contracts to do that. But I don't really want to start on contracts if people don't feel they need it. And we did ask the department and agency CIOs, particularly the agency CIOs, whether they had a need for it. And we haven't had anyone come back and say, we really need that, we really need a contract for it. Okay.
It seems like, though, we're going to have limited space in these Tier 3 data centers.
Interestingly, well, see, that's the interesting thing. We did an actual ask, if you will. We went out to all the agency secretaries and said, or agency CIOs and said, what are you going to need in terms of floor space? And interestingly enough, because of virtualization, and because the OTEC has done a tremendous job of cleaning up our usage of floor space at Gold Camp, we're actually not looking from our projection standpoint like we're going to need incremental space. If we meet our virtualization targets, I'm not sure that we're going to need incremental actual physical floor space. So we might look at cloud computing more from the need for a particular capability than necessarily because it's a square footage problem. Now that could change. I mean, we could get an increase in demand, but as I say, given virtualization, I don't want to build out brick and mortar, which is, capital expenditure, and it's, money that, that's the hardest to come by from a state perspective. So I don't want to build out additional facilities if it looks like we're not going to need them. And we're not seeing that need right now. Okay?
So that's involved in federated data center. We have the
Yeah.
tenants, but we have another, 128 tenants that are waiting.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
There's limited space for that office.
In the federated data center. But remember that part of the challenge for the federated data center was we had to put it, for those of you that have heard of the federated data center, the federated data center is a section of Gold Camp where it's a Combs-like environment where we're having 3 or 4 agencies come together and actually be able to put their data center together. And part of the reason that we limited the floor space is because it was CDCR and the receiver, and there were challenges around the policy that they had to have from a background check perspective versus what all the rest of Gold Camp is. Well, we had Senate Bill 1055 now, which says that we can provide secure background checks for all of the employees at OTEC, which means that we now have the capability that we don't have to fence this off, and we can expand that space if we need to. The other thing is that we're cleaning up the Combs area, because the Combs area was kind of quite frankly, for those of you that have been there, a little bit of a free-for-all, and it wasn't a real efficient use of space. So as we clean up the Combs area and as we standardize, we're going to free up more floor space. So we're not, at least based on our estimates, seeing a need for floor space right now. Yes? Did you have another question? Nobody else is asking, so you get another one.
So being said that, I just have 2 questions. A follow-up on the SOA. These new projects, like the newer projects coming on board, let's say which are in RFP stage, how much they should be focusing on a SOA type of future vision? Should those projects think about SOA vision, or they should be continuing to focus on the SOA vision?
On the what? I'm sorry.
On the SOA vision, service-oriented architecture.
Well, here's my problem with knowing how to answer your question. I'm not a big fan of doing SOA because it's fun, or it's because it's exciting. Because I've seen some projects where they've architected for SOA and have something which is so complex because of the way that they've broken it up that the thing doesn't run. And you created so many SOA layers in an attempt to be modular. So my advice to you is to focus first on, what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and then what's the best way to architect it, but it has to be a trade-off between a SOA architecture, which you might reuse again, ensuring that you can do it in a secure way, and also making sure that you can operate it. Because again, I've seen applications where it was great from a theory perspective, but the SOA layers and the way that they were connected made it nearly impossible to get it to run and even more difficult to maintain it. So that's why I say, I really prefer to think of it in terms of the business problem you're trying to solve, rather than saying that's an architecture to target for just, as an absolute. Does that make sense to you? Do you follow what I'm saying? Because I've seen SOA done well, but I've also seen SOA done not well, because it isn't well architected. Other questions? Oh, sorry, right in front, Mark. I'm sorry.
No, earlier, we had Congressman Lundgren in.
Mm-hmm.
He was speaking on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security for part of it, and he was talking about some of the challenges you're faced with having systems that are exposed to the internet or in other issues. And as he was speaking about that, it occurred to me that in some of the managed services we actually have support centers that are geographically located all over the earth, right? Mm-hmm. Conceptually, depending on how broad you make cloud computing, you could have resources located all over the earth. Mm-hmm. So are we giving geography any kind of play in the decision making, and are we working with the federal government to make sure that we're in sync with what their intentions are moving forward?
Okay, question is geography a factor in the way we're looking at cloud computing, and are we working with the federal government? Well, I'll answer the second question first. No, we're not. I'm waiting to see what the feds are going to do. They've made a number of statements about how they're going to use cloud computing, but I'm still kind of watching it play out. So I wouldn't say that we're ignoring them, because I'm, on record here. But I never say that I was ignoring them. But I'm also cautious about watching what they're doing. A second question is, geography makes a difference to us. Yes. We are talking about, if we buy services, we are talking about buying services in the U.S. For a number of different reasons.
But most of the companies we're dealing with are global in their
That is correct.
And they have call centers all over the planet.
That is correct. The companies we're dealing with are global. We know that. We know that they do have call centers, all over the world. And my focus, again, is not so much on the call center piece, but I feel the data needs to be in the continental United States. And I'm not comfortable with a provider that won't tell me where my data is going to be. Now, I understand that many companies, don't have that concern. So I'm not saying that, this is a universal. There are many companies, private sector particularly, that, can be flexible. But I think there's a thing that always comes to my mind, and I've said this before in this setting, and I'll say it to you again. In a prior life, I actually had some, the professional hacker kinds of folks come in and, look at breaches and look at what we were doing. And I asked them, I said, what do you think are characteristics of a state being responsible for information versus a private sector company like a bank, right? What do you really see? And what that individual said to me is that what's unique about state government is that we have the most depth of information for a set geographic area, which is the state. If you're a bank, you may have the same number of people in your database, but it's spread, right? And it's also the fact that we have lots of information about that individual. So whether it's a social security number, it's a driver's license, it's whatever. That always has stuck with me in terms of, as we think about securing our information and where our information physically resides, I think we have to be ultra cautious about that. Now, am I saying that people who do it differently are wrong? No. Do I think that, that they're at risk? I think everyone has to make their own decisions about the risk versus what they're responsible for. And it's just a decision that we've made here, to keep our critical data, in the continental United States. Okay? Yes?
I want to go back to something you mentioned very briefly about concerns about the automation of health records. And I'm not sure it's a question, but I'm hoping you have an answer.
Oh, okay.
I'm an occasional participant in some of the work of the Cal Ohio's Privacy and Security Advisory.
Okay, good.
And that work is under a persistent and tremendous amount of pressure to build it with little regard to the privacy and security rights of the persons about whom health records are kept.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure really seems insurmountable.
Mm-hmm.
It's from well-meaning folks who want to build it.
Mm-hmm.
But I really have a perception that what's going to happen to us is they're going to build it, and when it's built, it will be too expensive to fix it,
Mm-hmm.
and they will have built our privacy right out of the system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that for those of you that didn't hear, this comment was really around this whole question on health information exchange and how do you ensure that security is being built in. I can't speak to the particular conversations that you're in or the particular groups. What I will tell you is, and here I've kind of made fun of the Fed, so I got to be a little bit kind of backtrack on that. But the work that I've done, with the Federal Health and Human Services Organization around health information exchange, actually it surprises me that there's not the emphasis on security, because the conversations that I've been in on a national level have been around, if the security is not built in, the health information exchanges will not work. And a lot of question around who owns the exchanges. Is it owned by private sector? Is it owned by government? Is it owned by nonprofits? So I think you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of pressure around this whole healthcare question. But at least as I've been in some technology discussions, security and privacy are very much at the forefront. In fact, we're being asked to advise on the California effort around health information exchange. So that's not to say the pressure isn't there, but I do think that there's a lot of concern around security and privacy and what do you do. The other piece, though, that's a challenge, interestingly enough, is to get the patients to actually be as concerned about it in terms of protecting their own information. I think that that's a challenge because some people are, they know the importance of it and they're willing to actually work on it. And, other people just say, well, I don't care, just send my stuff over here so a doctor can do better for me or something. So it's a question of also getting us as patients engaged in that discussion around what security do we want. Yeah. I had another question over here. Yes?
What will the department's capability be to perform penetration testing and vulnerability assessment of the secure internet gateway or the level 3 data centers to our equipment design?
Well, I think those are areas. Keith, you want to take that one? Yeah. Because Keith is working on that, I think, today.
We have, to give you some historical perspective, we have a number of departments who have to have audits and they want to do penetration tests of their existing infrastructure. What we basically have them do is just formalize what it is they want to do. Basically, it's a service request. Tell us what you're going to do, where you're going to do it from how long, and to which systems. And then we can turn on, turn off, or modify the security controls that we have that will help you achieve the best results. So we've done this with the Department of Motor Vehicles several times. We do it constantly with their PCI application compliance. So it is doable. It's just something that what you can't do or shouldn't try and do is hire a vendor, go test this thing. Because hopefully, and we've had this happen, the security systems prevented them from even trying to be able to test it. They come back and say, can't do anything. Which was actually a good thing, but they didn't get any value from it. They spent a lot of money because they didn't contact OTEC and say, remove these systems, or we're going to do X. How do we succeed at doing it? And OTEC can help them in terms of ensuring any security controls are either in place, removed, or tested.
I think moving forward, let me add to that. One of the benefits of, as we move more to our Tier 3 data centers, we're going to be able to actually not have to do it department by department, but to be able to do it in a more uniform way for that particular data center as well. So, a part of the network consolidation, a part of the data center consolidation, gives us the ability to do those tests and be able to do them for multiple departments at the same time.
If I can add on, one of the challenges you'll have too as we become more and more virtualized is that you'll be testing a system that isn't exclusively yours. So the notification process has to be more elaborate, and you have to be much more gentle in what you're doing. You can't affect a resource that's a shared resource.
Yeah.
So there has to be more thought and more cooperation from each other.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to, and back to the cloud piece, as we're doing more virtualization, as we're doing more of our internal cloud and our internal infrastructure sharing, then we have to be considerate of that. So, yes?
So it's the intention then, from what I'm hearing, is that our system, our resources, and our data will be on common equipment with other agencies that have, if say we're law enforcement, we're going to have our data on the same systems as, say, a healthcare.
It depends on what you mean by the same systems. And it also depends on your organization, okay? What we will have in the data center is we will have uniform racking and stacking. And it'll be based on what each individual organization, whether they want to pay to have separate, segregated racking and stacking, or whether they can share. And it's not so much, I don't want to get carried away here. I mean, you're not going to be sharing databases. It's more a question of being able to share virtualized machines if that fits your need. Does that make sense to you? If it doesn't fit your need, if it doesn't fit your need, the only thing that you have to be aware of, obviously, is it potentially could cost you more because you're going to be dedicated as opposed to being, in the same, or being able to share a virtualized box. Now, the piece that we do want to share in our data centers definitely is the LAN, all the network connections, and we want to have the capability to do some storage sharing. Because right now, we've got a lot of underutilized storage because we're buying it for specific purposes, but we're not using it. But again, that's all dependent upon particular applications. If you're in law enforcement, you have particular federal requirements that sometimes you have to meet. So what we want to do is be able to provide the capabilities in a uniform way, and then it's a cost-benefit analysis, or it might be, a restriction that you have where we have to be able to fit into it. Okay?
I promise I'll stop it. In a recent National Guard audit that we had done of our facility, they came in and they recommended that our data not be housed in simply known locations, small numbers of locations, but to do more disparate locations, geographically separate locations. I was at your presentation yesterday as well, and you talked about the 5 specific locations that the data will be stored at.
Mm-hmm.
In the audit that was performed, they recommended against that due to the simple fact that now you're down to only 5 locations that have to be targeted, and you can take out the entire state of California government with just a
Mm-hmm.
few specific
Mm-hmm.
targets. Is there going to be any, say, undercover locations? Are we exploring the possibility of having, hot sites that are non-disclosed to the public, because we've talked specifically about 5 locations that the public will know.
Sure. We haven't looked at that. It certainly is something, as we move down the consolidation path, that's something that we can look at. But I think the good news about it, I'll be a Pollyanna, is that, if we look at it, we can look at it as a state because we're bringing everyone together, and some of those kinds of needs are things that we can look at. I will tell you, however, interestingly enough, you get a lot of audits from a lot of different folks, and I find it interesting. I think that definitely there's some truth from, that's why I'm saying disaster preparedness is extremely important, and we have to think about how we do that. But I think in addition to that, we have to be careful because to some extent, the more we spread our data, interestingly enough, actually we are adding vulnerability opportunities as well. So it's not an all or nothing, it's a trade-off in terms of how you actually look at it. So, okay, well, I think I've taken up all my time. It's been great being here with you guys again. I always love this forum. Leo does such a great job. He gets everybody fired up about security. And again, my main message to you is just remember, please, please, how important you are and how important the work is that you do and how important it is that you educate the others that you work with on the importance of security in everything that we do from a technology perspective. So have a great rest of the day, and thanks very much. Okay, we got a winner here. I don't want everybody else to blame me. Okay. Andrew Liu, an auditor at DMV. Where is he? Andrew. See, we even give prizes to auditors. See how good we are?
Thank you.
Thanks.